Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Malebo Sipodi. I'm a South African joining you from Lower Saxony in Germany, and I am the moderator for today's digital dialogue. For the benefit of participants who are blind or have a visual impairment, all speakers will begin with a short self-description. I'm a Black woman, my hair is in an afro, and my reading glasses have a red frame. Digital Dialogues is a series of panel discussions exploring civil society perspectives on the emerging digital world. Today's discussion topic is ethics and accountability in civic tech development. The development of new technologies always presents many opportunities, both good and bad. The end product user or product end user is mostly never involved in the development of these technologies. To this end, the developer has a limited understanding of the risks associated with the products they produce until the product is in the market, while developers only get to fix issues once the product has had some effect on the user. On many occasions, there has been little to no accountability for developers high on the production chain. In recent times, some of the issues that have been identified in these technologies include, but not limited to, lack of protection for personal information and transparency around the usage of data, environmental violations, alongside the spread of misinformation and deepfakes. Civic technology, also known as tech for good, cannot afford these ethical issues if it is to fulfill its purpose. Thus, civic technology should inherently consider ethical questions in the development process. In doing so, civic technology becomes responsible technology. In this digital dialogue, we explore foundational questions required to develop responsible technology and put the spotlight on those who need to be held accountable for unethical development and uses of civic technologies. We also ask who should be responsible for ensuring that the end user is protected from unethical development of technology. To help us discuss these issues and more, we are delighted to welcome to the panel today, Daniela Weber from NetHope, Ed Schenkenberg, who is from here, Geneva, and Kavisha Pillay, who is from Campaign on Digital Ethics. Ryan will also post the panelist bios when each of them comes on the screen. To start off today, each panelist will introduce themselves and frame the issue by sharing the current landscape and their key points for around 5 minutes, and then we'll have some discussion and questions. At any point during the presentations, please feel free to put your questions into the chat. We won't get to all of them, but we'll certainly try. Kavisha, would you please turn on your camera and join me here? Welcome, Kavisha.
Hi.
Please let us know, welcome. Please introduce yourself, let us know where you're tuning in from and share your key points, but please don't forget to start with a brief self-description. Thank you, Kavisha.
Thanks so much, Malebo. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon from Johannesburg. I'm Kavisha Pillay. I'm the Executive Director of the Campaign on Digital Ethics, or CODE. I am a South African woman of Indian descent, and I am wearing fairly warm clothes because it's ice cold in Joburg today. So to kick us off on this very important discussion, I think it is quite necessary for us to understand what we mean by digital ethics. And ethics, as you know, helps us to decipher right from wrong, good versus bad, fair versus unfair. And when it's moved out of the realm of philosophy and it's applied to different industries like the medical industry or the business industry, it can be quite helpful in terms of determining collective principles by which practitioners will abide by and be held accountable to. Now, in the digital space, there hasn't yet been clearly defined principles and frameworks by what we mean by digital ethics. But it is really important that we start having these conversations, given the role that digital technologies has had recently in terms of having some negative impacts on our societies, on our mental health, so on our persons, on our democracies, and the future of where some of our countries are going to go. So this conversation is quite necessary in relation to, especially given the sort of the race to put out new tech, to develop new AI. We should have a collective understanding of what we mean by digital ethics. Now, digital ethics can cover a range of different aspects, but from where we're sitting at my organization Code, I think some of the priority areas that it would need to consider is technology, does the technology protect privacy and a person or an individual's data? So how is the data being collected, stored, and used? And is this being done in a way that is respectful of the people that data is being collected on, or the organizations or societies that data is being collected on? The second one is transparency and accountability. How open are the innovators and technologists to sharing how they've built this technology, the transparency around the algorithms? Are they willing to be held accountable should their technology be misused, or if their algorithms are causing harm towards people? The third consideration is on fairness and equity. So especially right now with AI, how are you trying to address biases? How are you trying to mitigate stereotypes that presently exist within our societies? And how do we develop AI that will not enforce certain biases and would not oppress certain groups of people, but instead try to look at people from a human perspective and human collective? The fourth consideration would be around autonomy and consent. And this should be able to give users the ability to opt in or opt out from technology, as well as to have control over their data that's being collected on various apps or various sites, etc. And what we're seeing right now is that so many industries are rushing towards tech solutions that it's so difficult to actually, if you're wanting to get access to a service, sometimes it's quite difficult to actually speak to a human being and opt out of the AI technologies that they've put in place, just because the company feels that this is the more efficient way to address complaints. And then the last consideration I would say is around societal impact. So what is the impact of this technology on individuals, on communities, on our democracies, and on our environment? And the societal impact is something that I think we're starting to see more of as these technologies become quite entrenched into our daily lives. So I want to give you a case study of, looping back to civic tech. And civic tech, or tech for good, is, like Malebo explained, is the technology that's meant to help and aid communities, etc. And I'm a big proponent of civic tech, having built a few, solutions myself. But in Cape Town, there's a group of communities that have been stricken by gun violence and gangsterism. And the solution to this by the Cape Town government was to introduce a surveillance technology that would be able to identify where and when gunshots are being, where and when gun violence takes place within these particular communities. And whilst, the communities at first were quite excited about this, because there's a high prevalence of violence in these communities, they weren't completely aware of the surveillance technology that was being introduced that will then not just monitor and capture the sound of gunshots, but also of conversations and other things. And what you're seeing in this particular example is literally the city of Cape Town trying to put a band-aid over a bullet hole. So there's a very complex community facing a lot of societal issues. And instead of trying to address that, they thought that they needed a digital solution, and this digital solution was going to solve the problem. But unfortunately, that digital solution, again, it's surveilling people. People have not given consent to this. The city of Cape Town doesn't own that data. We're not completely sure what that data is being used for. we can see how something that's meant to be for good and meant to help citizens and a community can also then have unintended harms and consequences. And at this point where there's so much, there's such a willingness to find tech solutions to all of the societal problems, I think we do need to take a step back as innovators and technologists to see, is this going to be putting a band-aid over a bullet hole, or is the solution actually what is going to help address a societal issue on a very meaningful level? So I'm going to wrap up quite soon, but I think we are in a time where we do need new professions around digital ethicists who look at the technology that we're putting out there to see and understand and measure the harm and unintended consequences that that technology might have in our society. Now, technology, as we know, has propelled our civilization forward from the steam engine to electricity, the computer, penicillin, etc. It's what's moved us forward. But we are at a time where the jury is still out on whether or not the new tech that we're developing, from algorithms to social media to AI, is going to have a net good on humanity. And this is why we have to start having that conversation around digital ethics. Thanks, Malebo. I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Kavisha. And I think this is a great place to start in our conversation, just giving us definitions, but also a great case study. And I look forward to see how your points and discussion and your experiences and the research that you've done just comes together with the rest of our panelists. Ed, can you please join us on, just switch on your camera there and join us. And we look forward to hearing from you, Ed. And please don't forget to start with a self-description, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malebo. Thank you for having me as part of this conversation. My name is Ed Schenkenberg. I'm a 57-year-old male, born and raised in the Netherlands, but living and working in Geneva. The color of my hair, I suppose, is revealing my age, but I'm happy to say, feel very fit and young of heart. To describe the situation I'm in, I just threw over a glass of water, including on my keyboard. So let's hope that tech stays with us, at least for me doing this presentation. I'm the director of an organization that is called Here Geneva. We look at, we have a role in looking at humanitarian crises, in the sense of our work is to examine what we call or what we see as the gap between policy and humanitarian practice. In short, donor governments, UN organizations, Red Cross, Red Crescent, and NGOs all play a role in today's humanitarian responses to crisis, be they natural disasters or armed conflict. But are they actually doing on the ground what they say they will do on paper, or with so many words? And within, in fact, looking at that gap, examining it, because indeed we do not always find that organizations are actually doing what they said they would do. Obviously, ethics become very, very important in the sense of weighing the various competing demands, if you like, the values, the principles vis-a-vis the reality as such. And this also relates to the tech that we use in our work. To what degree are the means and everything, the means and tools that we have at our disposal now, to what degree do they actually help us in our work and improve the response to affected communities? But to what degree do they actually imply or involve risks, so to speak, precisely for those communities? And let me give you two examples, which are quite different, but I think give you a bit of indication as to the issues that humanitarian organizations need to take into consideration. In 2018, about 6 months after the exodus of the Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh, a Muslim minority, we were asked to review the work of a range of humanitarian organizations in Bangladesh, where in fact these refugees had settled. And what we saw, in fact, was, of course, many organizations coming to help the 800,000 or so refugees. One thing that we saw, in fact, was that at that time, and I believe some of you, in fact, are even on, in the meeting today representing UNHCR, the High Commissioner, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. What we saw, in fact, was that UNHCR was developing plans for registering these people in terms of actually recording their biometric data. So their biometric features would actually be recorded so as to know who exactly are these people that came to Bangladesh to seek safety and security. Now, by collecting and developing biometric data in such an unstable situation carries a number of risks. Of course, humanitarian organizations need to know who they assist, the composition of the population, and so on. But I was very surprised that I was the first one to ask UNHCR, are you actually sure? And this because this was the reaction I got back when I asked UNHCR, are you actually sure that you should collect biometric data? This is an unstable sort of situation. And the question then particularly becomes what is being done with that data? To what degree are you obliged as UNHCR to hand it over to the Bangladeshi government? Knowing also that the position of the Bangladeshi government vis-a-vis the government in Myanmar, the government that is responsible for the exodus in the first place, actually that relationship is ambiguous. And one cannot be sure that the data that the government would also perhaps receive would not be shared with the government of Myanmar, who of course would be very keen to know actually who these people are that left Myanmar. The issue then exactly is to put safeguards in place for the protection of that data, obviously data that is very sensitive. To give you another example, and in fact, Kavisha just before me spoke a lot about AI and the opportunities, but also the risks these AI carries for humanitarian work. And I think that's exactly also what we see in the work that we do in examining the work of humanitarian organizations. What we see, for instance, is that now organizations working in particular situations of forced displacement are using AI to develop, for instance, scenarios as to the future of certain crises, particularly when it comes to numbers of displaced people. How many more might be displaced in the coming year? Now, clearly, it is our role and responsibility as humanitarian organizations to prepare for the worst case scenario. But the risk there is also that we may get accused, and in fact, this has already happened, of fear mongering. Clearly, governments do not want to hear that the situation in their country or in their region is deteriorating as such. And this is exactly one of the risks in discussions that I've been part of recently when it comes to the use of AI by the humanitarian sector. The risk here is exactly that it will be used to develop narratives that paint a picture of humanitarian work that is a negative one, that spreads disinformation and even hate speech towards humanitarian organizations. And I hope we'll have the opportunity to discuss that further in the discussion as to how we should prepare ourselves in preventing these narratives from doing more harm than good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. Really important questions and challenges that you are putting out, especially to many of those who have tuned in. The type of organizations that we work for, when we or the different organizations have set out to protect the essential human rights and dignity, what kind of work goes into the tech that is put out, the tech that is developed, and what kind of accountability is taken? Thank you so much, Ed. If you've just joined us, welcome to the conversation. Please feel free at any time to either direct your question to a specific panelist, or just give us a general question, put them in the chat box, continue telling us where you are tuning in from. Thank you so much, Ed, again. And I would like to welcome Daniela to join me on the screen. Daniela, please let us know where you are joining us from, a brief introduction, and please don't forget your self-description. Daniela?
Thank you so much, Malebo. Hi, I'm Daniela Weber from NetHope, the Center for Digital Nonprofit, and I'm here from Germany, Saarbrücken, which is in southwest of Germany. And it's sunny here, so I shall attempt sending some of that sun on to Ryan in Berlin. I'm a white female with shoulder length grayish hair, and I'm wearing glasses and a colorful scarf. NetHope is a consortium of 65 NGO members, and we work together with our partners, with donors, with governments, and as an organization to close the new digital divide. What do we mean by that? The digital divide used to be about devices and internet access, connectivity. And while a lot of that is still there, still lacking, there are still gaps. For us, the new divide is about the ability to benefit from digital innovation, to have the digital skills, to have the protection of your data and of your users, and to effectively and efficiently use the technology, for example, in humanitarian and development settings. We are at the time of multi-crisis, needing more and more resources to address that, and at the same time, the funding gap is becoming bigger and bigger. So we believe that nonprofits must leverage digital technology to help them provide help effectively, to engage and support local communities, to engage with donors, and also to operate efficiently. And there are many, many technologies and solutions out there to do that now. But we do not necessarily have the knowledge and skills to use this technology in ways that are safe, ethical, and equitable. So for us, it's imperative to build those capabilities and to support nonprofits and the communities they serve in the responsible use of technology by providing training, by providing toolkits and advice. For example, we have created a gender equitable AI toolkit, which helps anyone wanting to implement AI to ask the right questions and think about the right things throughout the life cycle of such a project. Starting with the question, is AI even the right solution for your problem, or should it be something else? We push also for user-centric approaches, so focusing on the needs and the rights of the individuals and communities that are going to use the technology or that will be impacted by it. Technologies just such as generative AI are very easily accessible, and we know that the colleagues in nonprofit organizations have started using these tools for their day-to-day work, even before their organizations necessarily had discussed an organization-wide approach or created a policy for that. And experimenting and finding use cases and learning is a good thing. And some organizations have put a framework around that where colleagues can learn from each other and exchange their experiences. But we must make sure that those that are using the tools are very aware of not only the possibilities, but also the limitations and the risks, and that they understand that how to use the technology so they don't do harm. And we need to make sure that those building and implementing digital tech are aware of their legal obligations and their accountability, and they have visibility of the whole supply chain of the data and the technology they're using. For example, if you're using ChatGPT for your chatbot that provides information to displaced people, and there are quite a few pilot projects out there, how do you make sure you're not giving them incorrect information through your chatbot and create harm? On a more macro level, we must collaborate as a sector and take collective action, share knowledge between us, share each other's learning, agree on common frameworks, and influence policy. And also influence vendors. Our members have worked together in our emerging technologies working group since 2018. And that was really all about assessing new technologies and the value for the sector, but also making sure we learn how to implement and use them responsibly. And we've covered various topics such as the blockchain, biometrics, digital payments, and not surprisingly, AI. Of course, at the moment is really the topic and discourse of the day. And looking at AI specifically, our members through that working group have agreed on a humanitarian AI code of conduct, which we will be publishing shortly, that provides a high-level framework of those guardrails where we're saying, these are the things we will do, these are the things we will not do. And hopefully that will be adopted by many more organizations, and it will guide the way how they're going to use AI in their work. We also need to push vendors to offer equitable solutions and equitable access to them. We must ensure that the data used in AI solutions is representative of communities, representing languages, dialects, accents, or as our member Shahidi is doing, providing data sets that have been generated by citizens on the ground. All these efforts are happening and we need to support them. As often with new technologies, we are playing a catch-up game. We haven't done really well with biometrics. I hope we will do better with AI to make sure we're addressing the risks and the ethics of that new technology with urgency. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela. It's really important for us to know what exactly organizations are doing, and thank you for giving us a perspective from the kind of work that you have been doing. And I look forward to just seeing what other panelists have to say about this and what the audience has taken away from this. Please don't forget to ask your questions, put them in the chat box. Right now, we are moving on to the second part of today's dialogue, and we'll provide the opportunity for the panelists to ask questions to one another based on their opening inputs. I now invite all three speakers to turn back on their cameras and to ask each other's questions, you know, to tease out the relationship and intersections in the current landscape and in your work. Thank you so much. We're all here. I don't know, Kavisha, would you like to start us off in terms of what you've taken from Ed and Daniela, and how that maybe what is it that you'd like to spearhead in this conversation between the three of you? Thank you, Kavisha.
Thanks, Malebo. Yeah, thank you so much, Ed and Daniela. I think your inputs have been really insightful, and it's great that we're all on the same page. So we understand the need for technology and how technology, civic tech, can be useful and helpful to various people and communities. But we are seeing the dangers, and we are seeing the potential negative impact and unintended harms it can have if it's not built within ethical framework. So Daniela, what you were talking about having a framework or guidelines that dictate how you will build technologies, I think is really important and necessary. I guess from my side is I'm quite interested just from the perspective of do we always need digital solutions to these complex human problems that we're experiencing? And at what point do we approach these problems with a digital solution in mind? So are we putting the cart before the horse because it seems like an easy fit? Or what are the processes that we should be undertaking before we say, okay, I think a digital solution may be necessary to these problems that we're experiencing? Yeah, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts on that.
I can start. I have a lot of thoughts on that. Having been an IT person for a very, very long time, I completely agree, Kavisha, that is a danger, and particularly if something is so hyped as AI is at the moment. I see how organizations very easily start with the, oh, let's do an AI strategy, and not start with, okay, what problems are we actually solving? And for me, it's really pushing through a good methodology for problem solving to say, okay, let's really at first come together with the different stakeholders, with the users, make sure we actually A, understand the problem, and then B, talk about, okay, what are the kind of things that would be solving the problem? And usually there's a selection of choices, and not all of them are necessarily digital. And then if we're saying, okay, digital seems the right one, then build a prototype, verify it solves the problem. Yeah, so it's really doing this step-by-step process versus jumping into something that looks shiny and exciting, and your vendor is probably pushing you to try out and giving you a really great offer and all these things. So to me, it's really following that method and making sure that also those decision makers in organizations, at donors, I haven't spoken about donors, but donors also play a part in there, really are aware of, you know, that is a better approach than just saying, oh, here's a tool, how do we use it?
Ed, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd happy to throw in a few points. I've been part of several discussions in the last 2 or 3 months that were held in Geneva, where I sit on the use of AI in our work as humanitarian organizations. The first observation I had from those discussions that I felt we were, and include myself in that, extremely behind in understanding not only the opportunities but also the challenges, particularly. I mean, I really came away from those meetings feeling scared as such, because I thought, even, I thought this is, coming in the future. No, it's already there, much more than I realized, at least. And so in that sense, yeah, the question is exactly, aren't we? Well, we are very late in addressing the challenges. And again, when I say we, I particularly look at my own organization in terms of our work, the work we do. But I got a sense that it's more broad, as such. And so what I'm really picking up from this conversation is that the challenges are common, whether you're humanitarian development, civil society, involved in what we need to address these challenges around making sure that tech, and then particularly in that sense AI, is used for the good. We really need to work on them and address them together, as such. In my presentation, I used this example of an organization, and in fact, I can tell you which one it is. It's the Danish Refugee Council that has developed a modeling tool called Foresight, on the basis of which they can predict now numbers of people who will be forcibly displaced in the future, so to speak, based on algorithms as such that have been developed very carefully. And the margin of error is becoming smaller and smaller. It means, they're becoming more precise as such. And, this is the problem then in terms of humanitarian work. Data is used not only to know, what is it that organizations need to provide, but it's also used for fundraising. And so how many organizations are now going to develop these kind of similar tools, in the sense of raising their profile, predicting, so many people will be displaced, so these are the resources we need. I mean, it can't be that suddenly we have multiple models and agencies competing among each other, for whatever may happen or not happen, so to speak. Let's hope not. But the point being, again, for so many reasons, we need to work together on these issues. And then I'm just thinking of us as humanitarian organizations, but listening particularly to my co-panelists, and I'm very curious, and I've also seen already the questions in the chat. It clearly shows how as civil society organizations we need to work together on this.
Thank you so much. I mean, thank you, Kavisha, for just bringing up this issue that everyone is in a rush to get to efficiency. There's this rush for efficiency, rush to keep up, rush to bring on all the greatest solutions. But how much do we consider, what kind of structure is in place? Is it top down or is it bottom down? And I think I would like to pose a question to both Kavisha and Daniela, particularly because you come from two different parts of the world, Kavisha from South Africa and Daniela from Germany. There was a question that was posed, and I would like to pose it in a way that makes us think about public oversight. How much does the public, how involved is the public when it comes to these organization, institutions, companies, when they develop these kind of techs? How much do they consider public oversight? And so the question is, how do we ensure accountability in the context of significant power imbalance between local communities, governments, and large technology incubators? We'll start with you, Kavisha.
Oh, that's a that's a heavy
Yeah.
question. But I think it's a question that we do have to get right. From my side, and I'm glad that we're talking from different sides of the world. So in South Africa and Southern Africa, and perhaps on the continent, we haven't yet caught up to where the EU is in terms of having the necessary legislation like the Digital Safeties Act or the AI Act, which can help to prevent abuses, and where governments have sort of or governments are complying, they're understanding the dangers that these big tech platforms pose, and that there is a need for accountability and there is a need for reform. And because we are playing catch up a bit, it does leave us quite on the back foot, where people are on the people do experience abuses and harms and online harms, but there's no framework that would potentially be able to protect them. So we have to go back to ideas of of inclusive development. You know, we have to go back to ideas of these tech solutions have to be mindful, or the tech companies or those that are innovating or building the types of technology, they have to be mindful of the context that this technology is being applied within, and that they're also then compliant with internal regulatory regulations and laws, and they're, you know, abiding by ethical considerations, etc. So to just go back, you know, to Asia and to Myanmar, where Facebook was being used to spread a lot of disinformation and incite violence and harm. But because there were no content moderators who spoke local languages and were able to understand what was going on and prevent and potentially prevent the spread of this disinformation and this harm, it led to a lot of people dying and being killed and being murdered. And this is a real world impact of a technology that we think, well, we'll build one thing and everybody can use it. But if you're not thinking of it from an inclusive perspective about how would this, you know, how does this address language barriers? How would this be used within societies with different cultural dynamics, with different gender dynamics? We are then going to see groups of people who will consistently be oppressed or you know, be on the receiving end of online harm, because we've taken a blanket approach to technology. If we build it for the West, then surely everybody else will be covered. And we've seen that that's not the case.
Thank you so much, Kavisha. Before Daniela comes in, I mean, Abasa also posed a point and a question saying, I am from a sub-Saharan country, serving as a fellow in a tech organization, and I'm still struggling to understand data governance. So the issues around regulations still need to be clear, and how then does the government make sure that, you know, how does the government and the organizations make sure that the community is involved? Daniela, would you like to bring in your perspective?
Absolutely, I can. Thank you. Yeah, Kavisha already mentioned it. So we're in that sense very lucky in the EU with the EU AI Act, at least doing something to regulate the use of AI systems depending what purpose they are for. And also to the question on data governance, also having legislation like GDPR. And it is really applying and knowing that legislation. It brings me back to my point about education. If I'm working in a non-profit and I'm not really aware of what actually these legislations mean, I'm still going to make mistakes. So educating people around what it actually means for the day-to-day work is for me one really, really important point. It's holding organizations to account, and a lot of that for me is about making noise and bringing out these issues that are happening all across the world, right, and making them public. Most big companies, IT and otherwise in the private sector, also want to look like they're the good guys, so we should encourage them to do so, right? and have those conversations with them. But we must also take our own accountability as organizations in the sector and for what we are doing to make sure where we implement systems, where we handle data of beneficiaries, of people we support, that we have the knowledge and expertise and processes in place to do that as well.
Thank you, Daniela. And just to take off from what Daniela spoke about in terms of how do we keep organizations or companies accountable? So Ed, maybe you can come in here. I would like to read a question, but before that, I was speaking to somebody who said they're really interested in joining this conversation, but honestly, when they develop a tool, they don't have any ethical consideration because the bottom line is they are making money. And many companies would come out and say, well, we do have small print. It's up to the consumer or the community to actually read about the harm, to actually read about what it is that they're providing, the information that they're providing. It's not our fault. And is that enough to really say, let's put all, let's put all the responsibility on the community or the consumer? What exactly can be done? I mean, Daniela did address something, but what exactly can be done? How can you keep these, how can civic tech developers build in accountability mechanisms to ensure their tools are being used responsibly and equitably by government departments and other stakeholders? This is a question from Ebasa again. Ed?
Yeah, I was thinking about a few things here. I mean, first of all, of course, and some have already referred to the regulatory frameworks, and humanitarian organizations, but also governments and many others, were all late, I think, in recognizing the risks involved as such. And certainly, obviously, governments with certain agendas are also abusing, dare I say, the opportunities involved in AI. So clearly, lots of problems involved. I'm, of course, aware of some efforts, certainly on the human rights side, and I think they also referred to in the chat, and I'm sure people part of this meeting probably know much more about that in the sense of the efforts that the human rights community is launching, indeed, to ensure compatibility with human rights law as such. I mean, fortunately, and this is also what the companies can do. Earlier this year, I was contacted by Meta, who have a human rights specialist, in fact, a team now, but it's small compared to the overall resources that Meta has at its disposal. But precisely the issue they were looking at, based on real life situations, was in relation to the safety and security of humanitarian staff, because of the hate speech, or in any case, the disinformation, immediate security concerns. And so Meta is aware, of course, of its responsibility in that context. Is it enough? I don't think so. And the issue, and I think I also saw this in the chat in terms of the questions asked, the resources put at the disposal of humanitarian and development organizations, they are for delivery of assistance, particularly, and of course, keeping in mind that we should keep populations safe as well. So, protection should be on the forefront of our mind too, which is often not well funded as such, and certainly the work around it, creating the conditions for humanitarian organizations to be aware of the risks and really to examine our role when it comes to, making sure that that AI in our work does not more harm than good. I don't think what agencies, I have a lot of contacts, and of course our network is particularly in the humanitarian community. I've seen some organizations now investing in it. We're working particularly with one very important organization, particularly on the situation in Israel and Gaza. They have put up a number of people precisely on the hate speech issue, but by far it's not enough in terms of, so this question on what can organizations do, I think it really concerns us all. And it needs to be much, much more moved up on the agenda of our priorities in terms of, future role of civil society and humanitarian organizations.
Thank you so much, Ed. Yes, Kavisha? Just a quick
Thanks.
one, just be mindful of the time.
Sure. Just
Yeah.
on that, in terms of, you said the person who's developing civic tech, you know, in the pharmaceutical industry or in the vehicle industry, whatever it may be, before you put it out before there's human consumption and use of these products, it goes through vigorous testing. And at some point, we are going to say, we are going to need regulators that would be able to test the social harms that these technologies may be posing. And if technology is going to be harmful to this net good for humanity, then that technology should not be available for human consumption. But and I know that sounds a bit harsh and authoritarian in a way, because, you know, it's kind of a free space and we're using tech and we can use tech in innovative ways. But we are seeing how this can be how technology can be used for harm. And from a civic tech perspective, in the absence of regulations, there is a need to self-regulate. So if you are creating technology that is for good and is meant to help and is meant to address societal issues, you then have to take on some accountability and willingness to say, okay, this technology that I'm going to put out, I have to make sure that it is compliant, at least with some basic ethics and principles. And if you're already mindful that this tech is going to be for good, I guess it's a natural fit that you'd also be willing to make sure that you're protecting user data, that you're going to be transparent, that you're willing to be accountable, fair, etc.
Thank you. To our audience, please note we are reading all your questions, and if I do not ask it out loud, it's because the panelists have either addressed it, but we'll try to get all to your questions. Just considering time. Gift Richard Maloya asked, what could be the threats for digital tools, climate robotics, in the context of gender and migration? Maybe Daniela? I mean, particularly because you said you've worked as a practitioner and now working in the NGO space.
Yeah, I can certainly comment on the gender side.
Yeah.
Well, digital tools use data, AI uses data, and the way we're looking at this is to say we need to make sure that the data that is used, for example, to make decisions, does not impact or impact this bias. So again, if you are developing systems like that, you need to be mindful of what can happen, but also have the tools and techniques to make sure your data is representative that you're using in your system, and therefore the output of the system is representative and unbiased. I'm not sure if I'm addressing the question completely, because I'm not quite sure what the climate robotics mean, but I mean, for me, it's basically about the data and making sure it doesn't reflect bias or introduces bias.
And there's a question from Leonie. I would like to ask all three of the panelists to which extent they feel the narrative of national security or need for personal security in general feeds into their respective field of expertise and is used to further the employment of potentially harmful tech targeting civic spaces. She says, Leonie says, thank you all for the insightful presentations. Can one of you who wants to take that question? I don't think we have enough time for all three panelists to take the question.
I know particularly that it came up very much in the COVID response, where clearly, of course, tools were used in terms of the securitarization of health, for instance. And again, I know it's on the agenda of the World Health Organization. I know it's under discussion, but again, you know, listening to this conversation and particularly seeing these questions also in the chat. Yeah, as I said already earlier, I'm thinking we need to join ranks as such. We need to really, work together in terms of combining resources and so on. because the challenges are really quite massive, I believe. I mean, in the trade-off between security and rights, but particularly when it comes to privacy, we know where many governments are going to be, and it's not on the side of rights.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to tackle that question, or can we move on to the next question before I close it in terms of national security? Okay, so now I'm interested, Kavisha, maybe I'll bring you in here, and I'll go back to that issue of public oversight. Do you have an example, particularly in the work that you are doing, when you do involve the public? You did speak about that maybe there should be models that are developed, but do you have any example that you can share with us where, because at the end of the day, we should consider the public, where there is an involvement of the public and there is public oversight being considered, particularly in the area that you come from and where you come from in perspective of the global world?
Unfortunately, Malebo, I can't think of a particular case study right now where there was this sort of inclusivity between the government, the public, and tech companies in building this. So whether it was tech for profit or tech for social good, there's nothing that particularly comes to mind at this point. But I do think that it is a necessity. So even if you are building civic tech, and my experience of this has been when I've built civic tech solutions, is that it has to be rooted in a community need, and that Daniela also spoke to this as well, is that you have to go back and pilot and test this with the community to say, will this be feasible? Will this actually help to address some of the issues that you are experiencing? Because a lot of money gets invested into these, donors also fund. And we want to see the sort of fancy digital solution to some of these problems. And then you find people use it for a short while, and then it starts to sit on a shelf and not much is being done. So I'm sure that there are numerous examples of where, there's been this inclusivity of building these tech solutions, but it has to be something that becomes front and center of of building technology, and that the public participation can't just be a sort of mere tick box exercise, that there has to be constant, monitoring and evaluation of, is this something useful? Is this beneficial? Is it contributing to net good in our societies?
Thank you so much. Due to time, I would like to, it would be great to continue asking the questions, but please let's continue engaging. I mean, the ethical question is something that constantly needs to be visited. I will read some comments before we get our closing thoughts from our panelists. Ushnish says, I teach a course in program evaluation and I'm trying to grapple with effective altruism. Has the language of effective altruism become prevalent in ICT for development? And Susie responds and says, it might be interesting for you to look at the work of Timnit Gebru, who has coined a phrase which is a critique of effective altruism. I mean, these are important points and discussions for us to think about. And Prime also speaks about digital security and data protection and privacy laws should also be emphasized on during humanitarian intervention. And I think Ed is also addressing the question that I posed to Vashna, the last question, in terms of what is it that's been done. And Ed says, in migration, it offers developing scenarios and modeling. As I noted, this is, for example, done by Danish Refugee Council, and there is a link there. Thank you so much to the panelists for coming today and giving us their insightful points based on the research, based on the work that they do. I am going to open up for you just to give us a quick closing points or closing shots here for everything that we have discussed today. I'll start with you, Kavisha.
Thanks, Malebo, and thanks again for this opportunity. So we have to build a safer digital future that's non-negotiable. And for those for the developers in the room, or those thinking about these issues, when we building technology, we always need to understand the context that this technology is going to be used in. We need to give consideration to the ethical principles that I outlined earlier. Always be mindful of this idea of inclusive development, and that you're building technology with the public and with the users in mind, and that you're trying to facilitate environments where there is accountability and that there will be feedback. So we have a very, very long way to go. We're not sure how this journey is going to play out in terms of how technology is going to develop, and what it is going to do for our societies. But I think if we all can agree on some common ground that there is a need for digital ethics, that's a start, and we can use that as a basis just to build a safer digital future. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Yeah, echoing what Kavisha just said, I think indeed this discussion on digital ethics, I think is transcending, whether we are active in the humanitarian development or other domains as civil society, it really transcends our specific silos, if you like, or corners as such. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful and really would like to congratulate you, Malembo, and particularly the organizers as well of this discussion this afternoon, European summertime, in terms of, really pointing out the importance of this, that we work together on it, and that we pool resources. As I said, it really has opened, I think, also my horizon in that sense. As I said, I admit we're totally behind. We're calling ourselves a think tank in humanitarian response. I think we need to do a lot more work than what we have done so far on the issue. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ed. Daniela.
Thank you. Yes, it's about working together. It's about keep pushing for legislation and frameworks, of course, but also where we can influence what we do in our own work, making sure we inform ourselves. We stick to both the legislation that is there, but also those ethical standards that we set between ourselves. Thank you.
Again, thank you so much to our speakers for all your thoughtful contribution. Thank you to our international sign interpreters and captioners for their great work. And thank you for all those who have worked behind the stage to make sure that this is a great dialogue. And finally, thanks to our audience for joining us today and your insightful questions. All our dialogues are available as for on-demand viewing on the digital dialogue section of the center's website. The link will be dropped in the chat box. And you will, to receive further resources from our panelists, our organization, they will be sent to all the participants who attended today's session next week. If you would like to get in touch with our contributors, you can do this via the team here at the center. Please send an email to Ryan, and Ryan's email will be in the chat box. From me, Malebo Sipodi, thank you so much for joining us today. An important discussion indeed. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a good day or good evening, good morning. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.